This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Kyle, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Rolling hard and knee deep in the NBA playoff style. 2 rounds down. We got a couple more teams still working it out, but we're almost there to the conference finals. The top dogs have gotten to put in that work. So we got a couple teams that we need to just go on and get. But in the meantime, we got a big question that we need to throw out there for all of our NBA heads. So I'm not going to waste any time, but roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, my brother from another mother, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man, Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are we hitting harder than Triple G, or are we hitting harder than Canelo on Chavez Jr.?
Well, Chavez Jr., which is a punching bag, he even tried to put up a fight. So
crash test dummy.
Pretty much. So I'm gonna go with Triple G, man. Those body blows be something serious. But as always, it's great to be here to talk NBA basketball. So salute to all the fans listeners of NBA Baseline. Another great show on tap. Another amazing guest. First time on our broadcast will be this guest once you introduce him, and I can't wait to jump right in, man. An amazing topic. It's gonna be juicy, man.
Definitely. We got our man Chris Axman from the Almight Ballin Network. He's gonna be on board with us to pontificate the question of, is the East doomed until LeBron James hands over the crown? He'll be on board to help us break that down. It's gonna be a great conversation. Also in that segment of the drop, Go On Git. We got 2 teams on the outs. We time to hitch up their wagons and keep it moving. We break down their season and what's going to behold their future. And, of course, we got our coveted Coast to Coast discussing all things happening in the association. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, iHeartRadio. Also available on Google Music and the Roku channel. You can also catch the Baseline NBA podcast dropped on YouTube from time to time. So use any of these platforms to download and listen to your favorite ongoing NBA show discussing all the hot button topics that's happening in the association. Shout out to our peoples. 16 wins a ring. Be sure to go to www.16winsaring.com. These guys drop all of the goodies, NBA content and more, breaking down the NBA playoffs, expert analysis. We've had a couple of these guys on our show. They know it. We know it. They talk it. We play it. We podcast it. That's how we roll. So be sure to check out 16winsaring.com. All right, Shaw. You know how we roll. You know how we do. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on the breakdown, we have an excellent guest. I mean, my man is like a podretreneur, if I can pronounce the word correctly. Probably not.
Is that a word?
I'm not too sure. But if there's anybody who is definitely on his way to being the Warren Buffett of sports podcasting, it's our man from the Almight Ballin Network. He hosts one of the up-and-coming shows that's running things right now through social media and all of the major internet-affiliated outlets that we use. Our man, Chris Axman, host of the Almight Ballin NBA Show. He also heads the ABPN Radio, which is the Almight Ballers Podcast Network. And you can also check out the radio show via www.almightballer.com. Chris, thanks for joining us this week here on The Baseline. It's about time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually the best introduction I've ever received. So,
we love to roll out the red carpet. We love to roll out the red carpet, especially for esteemed quality sports analysts and insiders and sports personalities such as yourself, man. So welcome to the Baseline, brother.
Man, I need to learn from this. I'm taking notes. Okay, so just tell guests that they're perfect and handsome. I mean, you guys can throw in handsome. I sort of took that from that. But anyways, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for the kind words.
Oh, well, speaking of taking notes, I guess you've kind of helped us along already. I mean, what better way for us to talk about the legacy of LeBron James, whom I've called after what he did, last year in the NBA Finals, taking the Cleveland Cavaliers down from a 3-1 deficit to basically pull off the improbable. I'm sure, which many other critics and NBA pundits have already said, with regards to giving the Cleveland Cavaliers franchise, the city of Cleveland, their first championship in its existence. And then to see what he's basically doing right now, going to a 7th straight finals. I mean, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that in itself. Take notes to greatness when we talk about LeBron James. And Chris, one of the first things that I think a lot of people tend to forget. I mean, we are the harshest critics when it comes to the whole legacy thing because, we're born of different generations, a different ilk. But one of the things that really amazes me is that I don't think people really are giving LeBron James his just due for what he's been doing so far since he's been in the NBA and leading up to this particular point in his career. It's absolutely amazing. And this past series, again, it just living proof of the legacy that he is.
Yeah, LeBron is sort of walking on different ground. It's like he's playing a different sport from everyone else. I heard him, the time that it was most striking to me was on one of his podcasts. I don't remember the name of it, but he was talking after the NBA Finals last year and breaking down his thought process as Andre Iguodala went up to make that layup. And he went basically play by play through the last 2 minutes of the game, remembering exact details exactly. And if you pay attention to him, he does it in press conference after press conference. This is basically what happens when you put a brain surgeon's brain inside of the best athlete on earth. It's not something that we're ever going to see again. And it's hard for me to understand why people just don't want to appreciate that for what it is.
So when you talk about LeBron in those terms and of that ilk, if you use my French, if you will, what about him? I think over the last couple years, outside of his mindset and how smart he is, what else about him has impressed you? Because the topic of our conversation here is we're going to get to a little bit here is like, yeah, he's kind of dominating the East, and is there any real hope? But what else about you just kind of like impresses you about LeBron James over the course of his 14-year career thus far?
Well, so the brain surgeon analogy actually goes a little bit further. So I'm pretty sure to be a brain surgeon, you have 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and then 4 years of specialty, and then 4 years of like neurosurgery or something like that, like 16 years of training. And to do that, you're put through this insane, rigorous testing. And that's pretty much what LeBron does year after year when he's going either through the Olympics or, I mean, man, how many playoffs in a row has he made it to the finals now? Is this 8?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a guy who is more battle tested than any player has ever been. He's playing insane amounts of minutes, especially when you keep into account the fact that he's like 32 years old. He's outperforming everyone, and the mental strength you have to be able to do that is just profound. I mean, you hear Dave McMenamin of ESPN talk about some of the stuff he does. He never runs on a treadmill. He's always running underwater. You saw it in one of these LeBron ads back in the good old days. You remember the LeBrons?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he'll have like
15 of
weights.
them, yes.
Right. So he's got stress weights running underwater because every extra step that he would take if he was running to train would be extra pressure on his knees, and it would make him collapse a little bit before his time, right? I mean, he puts himself in a $100,000 cryogenic chamber after like every game. Seriously, it's like this freezing chamber steel thing that cools off all of his muscles so that they can heat up and expand again. Like, he is so dedicated to his craft that every single part of it has to be absolutely perfect. And I guess that's it. His dedication to perfection is the most impressive thing about LeBron to me.
Chris Axman joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Chris, it's interesting. We're talking about so many different facets of LeBron James, and one that sustains the high level of play that he puts on the basketball court. And he is at such a point right now where I think even he can dictate how he wants to play the game. In other words, most guys who say, I got to let the game come to me, he can actually say that. There's some players who I don't think that have the luxury of kind of using that quote, so to speak, when they go through their struggles. Like, we had doubted that about LeBron James when it came to playing against the Golden State Warriors last year. And ultimately, when I don't know, sometimes he has to read maybe a Harry Potter book or whatever the case may be to find something insightful for him to flip the switch and then impose his will. And I think our expectation is that he should be doing it every single night. Or maybe we're just spoiled, right? Like Michael Jordan did it every single night, even on meaningless nights, even in meaningless series, he would just do it. And with LeBron James, we look at his size, we look at his stature, we look at the way that he prepares, we look at his NBA acumen, and we sit here and we say, you should be just doing this in your sleep. And yet it's like he needs something to provoke that inner monster in him so that we can see the type of performances that we're used to seeing, especially at the expense of giving people this false sense of hope, like a team like the Toronto Raptors, who we said, oh, they're going to probably push them to 6 games. And then he just kindly excuses them, the whole North American border, the whole NBA community in Canada, basically Masai Ujiri, if he had any lace-filled cuss words for him. And ultimately, any move that he made to better this basketball team, he completely excused them in 4 games in what was supposed to be a series that actually tested the mental and physical will of LeBron James and this Cleveland Cavaliers team.
Yeah, it really did look like a cakewalk. I feel like that last game to me was so reminiscent of the Cavs regular season. I mean, you talked about how he almost just sleepwalks through the regular season. So the whole team follows suit because, I mean, Daddy LeBron, that's just the way that he is. Everyone just sort of, well, okay, Father, just lead us. All right. And so that last game, game 4, I heard commentators, I heard people talk about it afterwards and be like, well, DeMar DeRozan, he finally had a good game in the series. He was really exploiting every seam that they gave him. He was really attacking the places in the defense that he could. He was being aggressive, finding his shots. Those seams aren't there if the Cavs even care at all. I mean, the Cavs during the regular season just let teams have that. And that's why you see things like last year, the Cavs were the 2nd worst transition defense during the regular season in the league. And then last year in the finals against the 73-win Warriors team, they were a .89 transition defense, which would have been the best that season for pretty much this entire decade. And I actually do just remember that stat off the top of my head because that's who we're dealing with right now. I mean, he just, the rest of the league to him, to LeBron, is just sort of like first gear. And finally, to get to the once they make it to the finals and get to the Warriors, they finally start shifting up into gear so that they're going full throttle. But yeah, I mean, it was sort of embarrassing to the Raptors, and we'll see what happens to the franchise after that, honestly.
So, when we were talking about LeBron here, I think I was listening to the NBA radio not too long ago when a conversation that came up about how many players are still the best player in the league 14 years in. Now, granted, context. He's obviously only 32, but at the same time, context again, he's played X amount of games at the age of 32 and been in the league since he was 18 years old or whatever, and played so many more games. How impressed by that statistic alone are you? Because I know Steph Curry had this miraculous run over the last couple of years and things of the nature, and Westbrook or Harden's going to win the MVP and everything like that. But LeBron legitimately is the MVP every single year, every time he takes on the court. 14 years in, he really he's still the best player in the NBA.
Yeah, so is that how you guys feel? Like, if you guys had an NBA vote, you might have an MVP vote. I don't want to assume, but would you guys give it to LeBron?
Here's my problem, because the regular season is so distorted, right? We're supposed to reward guys for their play through the course of an NBA season, like the course of a regular NBA season. And there's been many occasions where LeBron James is kind of, he's conceded to Kyrie Irving and he's conceded to Kevin Love. So he doesn't outwardly go in and display dominance. But if you're a numbers guy, and I like to think sometimes that I buy into the numbers, but sometimes I really don't buy into the numbers because I think it lends too much to us absolving guys from just doing what it is that they should be doing. Let's flip the reverse on this with LeBron. From an analytics perspective, for the numbers that don't mean much and are not supposed to be historical, each and every single component of LeBron James's game equates to how important he is to this Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team. You can make the argument that LeBron James makes Kyrie Irving look like the elite scoring type guard that he really is. He makes Kevin Love the elite three-point shooting power forward that he's expected to play in that Cleveland Cavaliers system. You put those guys in other basketball teams, and we're just talking about these guys as being nominees for MVP-like type seasons, but ultimately would not be MVP-like players for their basketball team, because from a win perspective, a win potential perspective, a plus-minus perspective, they don't measure up to what LeBron James does every single year. And this is going back pre-Miami Heat days. His plus minus, his win share potential to me has been completely off the charts. So yeah, every single year he legitimately is an MVP candidate, if not an MVP winner, just in my opinion.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna agree.
Yeah. No, and I think that's what it boils down to. I mean, if it comes down to the actual vote itself, would I have given LeBron the vote this year? I probably wouldn't have, and I don't have a vote. But in terms of understanding the dynamics of basketball, just like to me in the era of Jordan, where Jordan was always the best player every year, he laced him up. LeBron is the best player every single year. So, but that's just what then you get into the semantics of it. Is it the best player? Is it, the most valuable player to his team? If you take this guy away, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get into all that. So with all that mix mash and things like that, I understand why Westbrook and Harden are definitely the front runners this year. But LeBron is the best player in the game, hands down, period.
Shaw, but let me throw something out here real quick in relation to when we bring up, say, Michael Jordan. And I don't want to say this because we need to get into this conversation about the Jordan-James comparison. This is not what this is about. But this is about mentality and the difference in why we have a problem with crowning LeBron James with something like the MVP award a little bit. In my opinion, when I think about Michael Jordan, and what I said earlier in the sense that Michael Jordan used to always lace him up with the intent to dominate, even when it feels like it's meaningless to do it. Like that's the thing with LeBron James. I don't think LeBron James at this particular juncture in his career, and I guess you got to jump into the mind, as you alluded to, Chris, into the mind of LeBron James, so to speak, and try to figure out, well, what's going on in his head? Like, what is his purpose? What is his end result? What is his goal for 2017? Because I really do think that it varies. I don't think that it's as nearly as important, say, to someone like Michael Jordan, who is about the individual statistics. I think that he was more selfish about wanting someone else to raise the conversation about being a dominant, if not to be the most dominant player or the most valuable player every single year that he existed, as long as he played in the NBA. Whereas LeBron James doesn't have a problem with sharing the wealth. He just wants to make sure that he doesn't allow the criticism and the noise to exceed the actual capacity of what he knows his game is dictated in this league, at least over the last 8 seasons straight. Which is why it brings up to that conversation when he got quoted saying, well, I don't know much more I have to do. What else do I need to prove to you people? I've won a championship. I've done this, that, and the third. I think that he's basically saying, like, why are you questioning about what it is that I have left to do when you should be questioning the rest of these NBA guys, like the Russell Westbrooks, the James Hardens, the Stephen Currys, because we as the media are playing up these guys to be the ones measuring up to LeBron James.
Well, and that's the thing, though, right, is that there's always someone at the top of the hill that you're trying to knock down. And right now, LeBron is on top of right now hill, and on top of the historical hill, I think that it's Michael Jordan. So there is a battle there. And I think that it's something worth talking about because really, I mean, LeBron is the best player since Michael Jordan, whether he's better or worse, honestly. Whether you want to say that LeBron's better than Michael Jordan or not as good as Michael Jordan, he's the best since, for sure. And, going back to the MP3, not MP3, the MVP thing.
Oh, yeah, we're taking it back. We're going back when LeBron was on MP3s. I know.
Well, this is an MP3 right now. But, I feel like the thing that we sort of alluded to but didn't quite say is, well, so is the best player in the league the MVP, or is the best player in the league the finals MVP? Because LeBron's the person who's putting himself there every single year to try to get the actual MVP, which is this finals MVP. And I feel like that's the more important award. And when you talk about his legacy, it is interesting that you want to compare an era like what Michael Jordan was playing in, where, I mean, I really don't think, like, yes, Michael Jordan was really good at defense, but no one really played defense. I mean, The fact that you could play Dennis Rodman on a championship team, Dennis Rodman would be Tony Allen, right? Like they would just ignore him and pretend that he didn't exist. But there was illegal defense rules, right? I mean, when you go back and look throughout NBA history, the 3-point line was introduced in the 80s. It was 1979, 1980. I mean, the game changes so much from decade to decade that you might as well not even be playing the same game. And the game that we're playing right now, LeBron James is the best to ever play it, and Michael Jordan was profoundly the best at basketball back then. But it's hard for me to compare the two, honestly, at this point.
Well, I think that's a great point, though. I think when you're looking at it, when you put it specifically in those terms per se, and not to say, because I don't think you're cheating in any way, shape, or form. The game does change, and the eras are different, and it is hard to compare. And we will never know, who would have beat this person in that era. I mean, that's a Sports Center thing that they love to throw out there and all of that. But I think if you're looking in today's rules and the way things are going right now, yeah, LeBron is that dude for his generation, just like Jordan was that dude for his. And I think those are great comparisons. So as we move this slightly along in terms of the conversation, when you say he is the best right now, how much longer do you think he has to be this guy? How much longer is he reigning over the Eastern Conference? Like this death dragon that nobody can get past. In the Eastern Conference, how many more years does he have of this?
Well, he might have sped up the process a little bit, not him. Actually, the team that he just finished dispatching in embarrassing fashion. You remember that Giannis possession in that last game of the series against the Raptors when he could have gone for a pull-up 3-point jump shot, but he drove instead? Yeah. You know what I'm talking about right now?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking
about. Okay, that might have sped up the process to LeBron getting dethroned, because if Giannis goes into this offseason and shoots 5,000 threes every day and develops a 40% 3-point jump shot, then LeBron's got a couple years on top, maybe. Without that, he's got to have maybe like 3 years on top. But I assume we're talking right now, when is he not going to be the undisputed king of the league, as opposed to, well, we can have a conversation about someone being better. That's the conversation we're having, because I feel like even 35, 38-year-old LeBron is going to be really useful in a lot of really interesting ways. I feel like LeBron's last couple of seasons in the league, whenever that is, might be at the center position.
Well, I see. So here's the thing that I'm really curious about, and I want to kind of commingle this with the idea and the intent about his dominance to the Eastern Conference, because I'm wondering how much of this is more on the Eastern Conference than it is about LeBron James. Let's be realistic. LeBron James is one smart cookie, right? At any point, LeBron James could have easily taken, quote unquote, his talents to another conference if he wanted to. But why would he want to expose himself and beat himself up when all of that talent at that time was all in the Western Conference, when he easily had a path that he could take through the Eastern Conference, right? And most of the talent that was available to him in the Eastern Conference were literally the guys that he's already dominated. He had already exceeded Dwayne Wade in the sense that he was the next up and coming. Chris Bosh, again, one of the more premier players at that time, coming from the Toronto Raptors, who then began to see his window about winning championships. If this is like, all right, do I want to go somewhere else because they're paying me more money and not know if I'm going to have a championship team to play around? Or do I just play next to the best man in the game, which is LeBron James? So he's already conceded there. And you look at the lineage of any and all of the teams that have been in the Eastern Conference, none of them have really built teams that were expected to beat a LeBron James-led basketball team, which kind of surprises me. And then if you look at who else is in the Eastern Conference that had any hopes or shot from a one-on-one perspective to do what LeBron James did, that would have been Carmelo Anthony, right? When he came over from the Denver Nuggets. So outside of that, there hasn't really been anything that I have seen. Dwight Howard, he got shipped off. Who else has there been in the Eastern Conference essentially to challenge LeBron James? And so I begin to wonder, is that more about the LeBron James factor, or is this more about how the organizations are building teams to beat a LeBron James-led basketball team?
You know what, man? That was actually put perfectly, is how are these teams being built? Because I mentioned the Bucks, and I wouldn't say they got lucky with Giannis, but no one expected it though. You know,
Right.
they did their homework and they get all the credit in the world for finding him. I mean, he was the definition of a hidden gem. He was hidden away in a different country. It was just hardly on the map. So they went out and found Giannis. Now you have a way that you can sort of contend with LeBron, and we saw that in a few of the Cavs Bucks matchup during the regular season. And then you look over at the Warriors. Of course, they're light years ahead, right? So they have a team building strategy that, I mean, they just added Kevin Durant, and the flexibility and the maneuvering and the dancing that you have to do to be able to put that team together is incredibly impressive. And it strikes me as there seems to be one team here that right now isn't in a position to battle with the big boys. These teams that are, frankly, like I said, playing a different sport. They're playing the sport that's going to be played 10 years from now, right? They've transcended this generation
Like
of basketball.
they're playing. Yeah, to your point, Chris, it's like they're playing as if there will not be a LeBron James, right? Like he won't be here that long, but keep messing around and let him sweep teams like this and take regular seasons off, and he'll still be around. So
here's the thing, though, right? I mean, even LeBron has some trouble with Paul George, right? I mean, the Celtics are in a position where it doesn't seem unrealistic to me that they could go out this offseason and get Jimmy Butler and Paul George, honestly. Like that they have the assets to do that. They have a general manager who has put together a team that, man, you want to talk about a team to be a LeBron-led team? How about those Celtics, man? I mean, that was the team in the East that put up their dukes and fought LeBron and beat him. And I think that really they could very easily go out and get Jimmy Butler, pay top dollar for him because of his contract, and then go turn to the Pacers and say, well, yeah, you could trade your superstar who has 1 year left on his contract. Sure, you could go trade him for Jordan Clarkson and Julius Randle, but we'll give you Markelle Fultz. Like, we'll give you Avery Bradley. We'll give you someone really good. And they might just strut out there next year with Isaiah Thomas, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, Al Horford, and then Jay Crowder playing the 4 because Paul George hates it. I mean, that would be nuts. That would be insane. And that's how smart you have to be if you want to put together a team as good as the Celtics or the Cavs or this hypothetical Celtics or the Cavs or the Rockets. I think are great. And like the Spurs or like the Warriors, everyone else, yeah, they're just not even close.
Sean, let me ask you this question real quick to Chris's point. So why doesn't a team like the Boston Celtics, or maybe a team like the Detroit Pistons, well, why don't teams that look like they're maybe a 1 or 2 pieces away, why aren't they rolling the dice in the Eastern Conference more so than what we're seeing from the Western Conference teams? Like, minus teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, who we always keep saying they're hampered by the cap. And a lot of that, I think, is just by, bad organizational decisions, or maybe they're just kind of cornered because of the circumstances and the market that depicts it. But teams like the Boston Celtics and teams like the Atlanta Hawks have had this window where you're waiting for them to roll the dice to challenge the king. And it almost seems like they're all swallowing their tongue, like they're afraid of the Inquisition that might happen.
I think the Hawks did try to make a run, and they got swept by the Cavs. And I think that the Toronto Raptors did roll the dice. They went out, they got the LeBron stopper, PJ Tucker, the GOAT, right? They got Ibaka, and they got swept by the Cavs. I mean, that's the great thing about LeBron and this Cavs team. They're so demoralizing. They're not only going to beat you, they're going to kick your ass. They're going to spin the ball on his hand.
Chris, let me ask you this question. You really thought that the moves of Serge Ibaka and PJ Tucker were essentially going to be the end all be all? Like, I was more concerned about those guys and where they would fit in a team that still struggled to score the basketball. So ultimately, I get it. If the idea is that you're intending to stop LeBron James, which they didn't even do that pretty much, right? They didn't even give themselves a chance in that series against the Toronto Raptors. And I know Sean and I are going to discuss about the fall of the Raptors, right? Like, they just went they went extinct before there was even, the thought of prehistoric with this team. I mean, when they
LeBron dropped a meteor on him.
Yeah, exactly. But that to my point, Shaw, I guess my thing is that when, like, I get it. Like, I applaud Masai for making those moves, but I still didn't think those moves were strong enough to say that they were going to beat the Cavs. I think it was going to challenge them unless I saw a flaw in the Cavs that was going to expose the strength of the moves that Masai Ujiri made. But again, I still feel like teams are not, they're not throwing it all in there. They're not bringing their big boy pants in to the table saying, I'm rolling the dice. I'm going to go for broke to try and beat the king.
Well, I think that's, a very, interesting assessment of it, because I think to Chris's point and to yours a little bit too, Toronto felt like they had enough. They challenged them to 6 games last year, right? Then they felt, okay, we get Ibaka, we get PG Tucker. That might be enough to get us over the edge. They were wrong. They miscalculated, and that's all there is to it. Like, they were wrong. I think Boston and Danny Ainge, he's looking at his team and his roster saying, all right, well, how close are we? So he wanted to really kind of see right now this year, all right, is this good? And are we good enough to challenge? Is just getting Jimmy Butler enough next year to challenge? Or, like to Chris's point, do we need to get 2 more guys in essence to really challenge and then overcome? I was listening to a lot of NBA radio, and as Brian Scalabrine is obviously a big Celtics insider and things of that nature, and he's saying like that is basically their mindset. They know even getting Jimmy Butler this year or Paul George, one or the other, not both, doesn't necessarily put them over the edge. Does it guarantee you beat LeBron? It gives you a better chance, but doesn't guarantee. And I think for some of these teams, they're looking for that sure shot right now, because if you go out there and make a bunch of moves, blow up your roster, blow up your draft picks, and eat away all your cap space, and then you don't get it done, then you look crazy. Then you look like the Brooklyn Nets, and that's what the Celtics don't want to do at this point of where they're at right now. So they may take this season to these playoffs to kind of assess themselves and figure out what their next step is. And they could come back very strong next year and make multiple moves. Again, it could be Paul George, could it be Blake Griffin, Jimmy Butler, whoever. They may do those things, but I think they were a little bit gun shy right now this year. And in terms of the teams right now that we have in the Eastern Conference specifically that have a natural progression, I think Chris had a great point in terms of it probably is Milwaukee. In terms of their natural progression, because we've already talked about them, CL. They're pretty much cap stretched right now. They have all this young talent. I think they just re-up Jabari, or they're going to have to re-up Jabari pretty soon as well, too. They don't have a lot of room to grow financially, but they have a lot of young talent, obviously with Malcolm Brogdon and Thon Maker and all those guys. They're the next team, I think, just within their own selves and progression could get better without necessarily having all the other teams still have to make moves in order to do so.
So, Chris, final thoughts here, and you brought up the point about the Milwaukee Bucks. If we use the Milwaukee Bucks as the litmus test to measure how long LeBron James reigns in the East, how long are we giving him?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think the Celtics could make some really interesting moves, and I agreed with a lot of the sentiments about them sort of biding their time so that they could have the perfect move. And that's sort of why I look at the Bucks and I'm a little bit questionable. It looks like there's a lot of rumblings right now out of the Bucks front office that there might be a shakeup. They just brought a young guy in last year to be an assistant GM. I don't remember his name. He was from Utah. He was under Dennis Lindsey. They brought him in last year. They have an older GM right now who has done a good job, but all this stuff is happening. And you look at some of the acquisitions they made, where they decided to spend their cap space. I mean, Spencer Hawes isn't going to get it done. Dellavedova is a nice guy. It's good to have him on like a $3 million contract or something, but they're paying a little bit too much to him. I mean, they've got 15 different centers. Like John Henson is just sitting, wasting away. And that's the thing. They haven't constructed their roster perfectly. And that's what it takes if you want to deal with LeBron. The reason why the Bucks might have a shot, though, is because if you look back at those old Cavaliers team that LeBron couldn't quite push over the mountain back before he left to the Miami Heat, they had one 67-win season, and their starting lineup was Boobie Gibson, Delonte West, LeBron, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, who was like 34, and Ben Wallace, who was like 36. It was not a good team. But LeBron was so amazing that he somehow dragged this really crappy team to 67 wins. And if Giannis can be that good, that's their shot. Otherwise, I don't see it. The Celtics, though, they've gotten all the assets. They've made all the right moves. They've been really smart and deliberate. And they might be able to form their own little super team and take it to the Cavs. But, yeah, I mean, you look at the rest of the Eastern Conference. And I thought it was funny.
But do you think, Chris, to your point, do you think it's going to take a super team, or do you think that it's going to come down to a young, brash, group of emboldened ballers, so to speak, to coin the phrase properly, young ballers who aren't afraid, you know what I'm saying, to knock off the king?
Yeah, I think that when you look at this generation, it's probably going to be a super team. And how that comes into being, I'm not quite sure. Like I said, the Celtics are a good candidate. A sneaky good candidate, honestly, is the Miami Heat. I mean, they've got a great coach. That's like part number one. They're clearing up enough space. I feel like Blake Griffin might end up in Miami. He's a good fit. Hassan Whiteside, whatever. I feel like right now, there's no one in the East who has a really talented young core, but also has kept up enough space to be able to sign free agents to build around these guys in the appropriate way. I mean, geez, you look at New York and what they're doing with Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps is going to be a super duper star. He's perfect for the modern era, but they just signed a whole bunch of BS to their roster that they didn't need. So, I mean, every time a team does that in the East, LeBron, just chuckles a little bit and is like, okay, now I don't have to worry about the Knicks. Now I know that Kristaps is dealt with because his team shot themselves in the foot. And you look out across the landscape and yeah, Celtics, Bucks, that's it. Maybe Heat, I don't know. But Cavs are going to be on top for a little bit, it seems to me.
He is the man. He rolls like no other. You have to check out the show, Almighty Ballin NBA Show. Our man, Chris Axman. He's also the head of the Almighty Ballers Podcast Network, and also for Almighty Ballers Radio, which you can find on Dash. Be sure to check out his Twitter handle at Almighty Ballin, and also check out the Podcast Network's Twitter handle at ABPN Radio. Chris, man, we'd be on here for like over an hour breaking this stuff down. So this definitely will not be the last time we're going to have you on here to give us the almighty talk of the NBA landscape, brother.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for arguing about some LeBron. I mean, you talk about almighty. LeBron's the almighty, basically. He's the almighty baller. So I'm never going to turn down a chance to talk about LeBron.
Well, I've already said to Sean and I have already discussed this. We've thrown this on our show. LeBron has his own, chemical, what I'm saying? He's already on the element table. He basically, he absorbs and gives off Lebronium. Okay. So, as far as I'm concerned, man, he is his own entity. There's protons, neutrons, you know what I'm saying? And then there's positrons, there's Lebronium. That's how I feel. So,
yeah.
Until somebody finds their own element on the periodic table to combat LeBron James, I really don't see, him falling off the table anytime soon in the Eastern Conference, man.
Yeah, I like that. Protons, neutrons, Lebrons. That's great.
Exactly. Our man, Chris Axman. Chris, thanks for joining us again, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This is the Go On Git version of The Drop, as two more teams get dropped out of the NBA playoff picture, one from the Eastern Conference and one respectively from the Western Conference. And look, there's no denying the two most dominant teams handling their business, making sure that their roster is well rested to make this final run. One more hurdle to pass before a head-on collision course to the NBA Finals, and that being the Cleveland Cavaliers handling their business with the Toronto Raptors with a broom-like performance, as equally the Golden State Warriors. And they're finishing off the Utah Jazz, kind of a somber note, if you want to use the Jazz pundits out there, kind of a somber note, not a blue note, but a somber note, getting swept themselves. So Shaw, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the Toronto Raptors. I got to tell you, man, I'm utterly disappointed with this Toronto Raptors team. And it's interesting because we just had our guest, Chris Axman from the Almighty Ballers Network, he was talking about, how Masai Ujiri built this basketball team to run with the Cavaliers. And I'm not so much as disappointed because I think everybody knew that this Raptors team would still kind of fall short against the Cavs. But I was expecting there to be a much more competitive effort by the Raptors. And this just felt like a team that just absolutely showed no heart, man. Like they showed, like they just conceded to the Cavaliers, which to me is just utterly disappointing. It's an absolute step back from what they did last season.
Yeah, a couple late runs, I think, in their games at home, and then they just ended up not having enough gas to kind of stay with LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But as we alluded to a little bit early in the show, in terms of LeBron seems to have taken the heart away from a lot of these Eastern Conference teams, and specifically Toronto. And a lot of people are out there saying, and I'm not knocking Kyle Lowry for not playing, but a lot of people are saying like he already knew what was going to happen anyway, so that's why he just went ahead and sat out those last two games.
But those kind of comments, though, man, make him look like Jay Cutler right now. Okay. Like, and I was actually a proponent, and I don't like, me, I like to sometimes cross-reference my sports, but I want to give people a level of a context because, quite honestly, it's been a while since we've had something like this occur. We're talking about a Raptors basketball team that was already considered an underdog. Now, I'm not saying that Kyle Lowry needs to sacrifice his career for the greater good of pulling off the possibly impossible, but I also felt like Kyle Lowry wasn't just the issue. Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan were actually the X factors, right? This team was built from a depth perspective. Should these guys not get off their shots and be offensively great, right? I mean, it's not like we didn't see this already from DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. These guys are slow to execute, to get off in the playoffs. So that's why you got Corey Joseph. And that's why you got all of these litany cast of guys, over this course of these 2 years, is to have a deep enough team to run with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I'm just saying that from the jump, this did not look like a team that was prepared to play against the Cavaliers, period.
No, they didn't. And Masai and Dwayne Casey and everybody in the Toronto Raptors organization has to take a hard look as to really what's next. And I mean, you hate to sing the same kind of swan song for each team that gets exited or ousted from the playoffs and say, oh, well, do they need to rebuild? Do they need to rethink things? But I think in the case of Toronto Raptors, you don't know that they're going to be back. My gut feeling is that they do run most of this back. PJ Tucker, Serge Ibaka, obviously Kyle Lowry is going to opt out. We'll talk a little bit about him in a minute. But I feel like pretty much the only person that's guaranteed to leave is PJ Tucker. And that's not a hard guarantee. I think they came out and said that they love Ibaka. Ibaka loves it there. They want to bring him back. But Lowry's obviously the X factor. And they have the salary to be able to make a couple moves. $91 million in the committed salary next year. That's with Lowry's $12 million cap hold on. He'll opt out, so that'll bring that down to 79. And then they'll have some opportunity to make some other moves and figure out what way they want to go. But this isn't a great, huge free agent pool out there. So they've already lost their pick in essence in getting Ibaka and trading Terrence Ross or Orlando Magic. So they're not going to get better that way. You just wonder what magic can Masai pull out this year and this summer to make this team better next year.
Well, and Shaw, look, I don't know how many cracks at the apple Serge Ibaka is going to give himself. At some particular point, you just got to be fighting mad, okay? He's watched this scenario play itself out already when he was part of the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? And he actually had a better basketball team that could get himself to the finals when he played next to James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant, right? Now you get flipped over from OKC all the way here to Toronto, and I think in many respects, he's kind of lucked himself, via through Orlando to find himself in another situation where he's going to be playing for an opportunity to get to an NBA Finals, albeit you do have to play against the King. But at some point, Shaw, if you're a competitor, do you not get sick and tired of running into the person who is denying you the opportunity of hoisting that trophy? Does it not burn in your soul? I mean, I know LeBron James went through it. Dwight Howard, although his attitude and his demeanor is depicting of someone who still hasn't gotten it, but I'm sure it's gotten at him when he was in Orlando Magic that he's tired of running into the same dudes that are preventing him from hoisting up a trophy. If you're Serge Ibaka, I don't care how long you plan to stay or what your intentions are with the Toronto Raptors. You cannot have the same mindset that you had coming via from Oklahoma City and not think that it's going to have an impact on a team once again on the precipice of trying to do something that seems to be improbable against one of the most immovable objects in the NBA, being LeBron James.
Well, it's interesting you pick on Ibaka here because I don't know what more we can expect of this guy at this stage of his career. I mean, yeah, he's only 27 years old and been in the league a little while now, but we know he's not a number one. We know he's not a number two, and it's arguable if he's even a number three option. He really seems to be a rotational guy who can get hot from time to time, but his calling card needs to be rebounding and blocking shots.
But Shaw, I'm just saying, like what we have said before. It's like you got to slap the face of Blake Griffin on LeBron James in order to wake up Serge Ibaka. I feel like Serge Ibaka.
But how? Serge is not that guy.
I know he's not that kind of guy, but it's not so much that my expectation is he has to be that guy as much as I'm saying his mindset, the physicality. I mean, the numbers don't always necessarily show as much as the effort and the play, and he just disappears. I mean, essentially, you roll the dice to bring this guy in, and I'm saying Jonas Valanciunas is still a presence on the basketball court more than Serge Ibaka. How does that play, right? And you're saying Jonas Valanciunas is not your big, or else you would have stuck with that and gotten somebody else to do something. I thought that they got Serge Ibaka to facilitate that physicality that Jonas Valanciunas seems to struggle doing on his own in these type of matchups against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Well, no, but he doesn't. Again, we talked about it at the beginning of the series, and we asked, and kind of laughed and joked. Said
you asked, I pleaded.
Well, you said does Toronto have a chance? And I was like, no, they have no chance at all. But even I didn't see them getting swept out of the playoffs. And we talked about Ibaka maybe trying to use some of his physicality, to post up a little bit. And again, we know that's not his typical game, but trying to just get in there and mix things up a little bit with Kevin Love and make the Cavaliers play some defense. And that wasn't there. Plus, you didn't have the facilitation of Kyle Lowry the final two games to kind of help him out there and things of that nature. And again, I mean, this is not on Ibaka. This is on the entire Raptors organization, the entire team, who just did not play well. They didn't defend, and as you alluded to in the outset, they looked defeated from the first game, and it's like, all right, well, we got here, but we knew we weren't really going to do much with it, and that's unfortunate because they have some major questions that they're going to have to answer. And I will finally say this live here on our podcast: I am off the Jonas Valanciunas bandwagon. This guy is. I see why.
You don't unhitch the ride, right? You don't unhitch the ride.
I see it. I keep saying, I was like, he needs to get his minutes. Because I think last year we saw in the playoffs he was really a dominant force, and even the beginning of this year played really great the first 10, 15 games of the year. Kind of fell off a cliff, and then it's just the same thing over and over and over again. He's only 24 years old, so maybe something happens at some point where he really starts to click and starts to get it, but. There was parts in this series, too, where he was just trying and so hard because I guess he didn't think he was going to get the minutes if he didn't produce immediately. So then he was forcing shots and trying to run isolations. LeBron James stood him up, like flat out stood him up on a post-up one time and resulted Valanciunas to shooting a fadeaway. He actually made that shot. But I was like, damn, you couldn't even back down LeBron. And again, I know that's not an easy task, but, you're 6'11", 7 foot, 280 or whatever it is, and LeBron just stood you up like it was nothing. So, this Raptors team is in a disarray in some sorts of and they're going to have an identity crisis. And Masai, again, as good as he is, this is not an easy fix. And again, I'm not trying to say, just blow it up and things of that nature, but you just don't really know what direction is going to get them over the hump.
Definitely. And it's just, to me, it's just a sad situation, in my opinion, when Cavaliers' greatest or their toughest challenge so far in this year's run to the NBA Finals has been in the first round with the Indiana Pacers. And when you look at the Raptors and you look at the Pacers, you tell me who actually should have the better basketball team. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our section of The Drop, and our Go On and Git, as the Toronto Raptors was handily taken care of by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's go ahead and switch to the other side of the ball, Shaw.
Well, hold on real quick, though, just before we jump to that. Just, what's your thoughts and we'll do this really quickly. Lowry kind of said that he would, if he were to leave, he'd like to maybe go out west. And, speculation is out there. Is there a West team out there that you see would be for an interesting fit for him? I'm looking at San Antonio, obviously. The only issue is that would you pay Tony Parker to be a $15 million backup? Could he go to Memphis and play like a kind of a two guard and then run a 2-point guard type of thing? Maybe he does something like that. Or maybe in Utah, if they're able to keep Gordon Hayward, George Hill doesn't look he'll be back. Maybe that's the situation he could go to. But what are the teams out west really quick that you think Lowry could potentially go to?
And you're talking about playoff potential basketball teams?
Well, that's what he said. He said if he leaves the Eastern Conference, he's going out west to try to win a ring. Forgetting Golden State's out there, I suppose, but that's where his heart is at. He just wants to get away from LeBron and try a different shade of green out there in the Western Conference.
I mean, I could definitely see him playing in Memphis. It'd be a very tough stretch because
Home.
Yeah, it would be a tough sell for me for him to go to San Antonio, and part of that reason is because I think Greg Popovich sees something in DeJounte Murray, and I think that the Spurs have to really take into consideration, where they're going with Kawhi Leonard. Now, if this combination of Kawhi Leonard and LaMarcus Aldridge seems to still continue to be a problem in flux, I mean, you shut it down, because if you can add as many pieces as you want to the situation, I mean, ultimately it's going to come down to those two cornerstone pieces putting it together, and you're doing it in the height of the Warrior Empire, or the Warrior reign, so to speak. You have very little room for error in that. I could see where Kyle Lowry can make something work with a legitimate big in Marc Gasol, because I think that's part of the problem with his situation in Toronto. I don't think the combination of Lowry and DeRozan, because you can clearly tell that those guys really want to do it. They want to do it, and I think they do it. They take on too much, and I think part of that is because of the fact that they realize that their front court is not in a situation where it alleviates the burden of them offensively establishing everything for this Raptors basketball team. They're getting no help from the wings, and they're getting no help from their front court play. So you put him in a situation in Memphis where he could play next to a legitimate Marc Gasol. You got a guy like Conley, who's improving on the three, who can still dribble, drive, penetrate. That to me is a much more movable piece. And also, it might actually work in the favor of Memphis, touting another possible free agency pickup to help strengthen that front court, more cater to what Lowry would do. I think it's a kind of a roll the dice scenario, but it's a good roll the dice scenario because you have two legitimate guards that could play as a two-guard scenario. Actually, Lowry could go back to the two-guard, and Conley can continue to run the point, which I think is what Lowry wants to do, and he can still have an advantage at the two-guard position. So that to me would be the better move. Now with Utah, that's another scenario situation, because I'm trying to figure out where Lowry can fit in with how Snyder has got this team established. At some point, you got to say, are you going to play Exum? And we're going to get into in this situation with what the Utah Jazz showed us in this series, albeit they got swept. You got to have to make this decision. While I understand that Hill is a good replacement and he helped this team from a metrics perspective get them over the top to get into the playoffs, I see a lot of what Dante Exum and what they drafted him for starting to come out. And you're going to have to say, do you continue to hold him back coming off the bench at the expense of paying the money you're paying to George Hill? If George Hill hops out, I don't think that you're necessarily taking a step back by having a guy like Dante Exum now as your starting guard moving forward, because now he is fully acclimated in Quinn Snyder's system, which I think could be a tough sell for a guy like Lowry to come into to help sustain what the Jazz just did this season.
True, good point. And the final thing I'll say on it is, if there was a sneaky team not championship ready at all in any way, shape, or form, but if there was a team out there where he could try to maybe grow with over the next 2 years, it'd be Minnesota.
Minnesota was. I was just about to say that, Shaw.
If you figure out the Rubio situation, and then I understand Chris Dunn, and you want to groom him and bring him along, and things of that nature. But if you trade Rubio, they have plenty of cap space because all those guys are young guys over there, under $80 million in terms of calories, in terms of salary. Rubio is making, I think, roughly about 15. Take that away, then they're even below the floor. Lowry that's a situation Lowry could probably go to, and they could figure out some other things. Move Rubio to get somebody else that they could figure out, maybe to help in that wing rotation, that behind Levine and Wiggins. That could be a very interesting move. Lowry seems like the kind of guy that Tibbs would like as well. A much better option to me than bringing in a guy like Derrick Rose. But again, like I said, we're just throwing things out there, folks. It would be interesting to see. We don't know that he's going to leave and actually go to the Western Conference. It might be just a leverage so that Masai makes sure that he antes up, because Lowry's going to be 32 or something like that years old. So he's looking for like his final contract, and a big one at that.
Definitely. All right, so let's go ahead and focus our attention, Shaw, to the Utah Jazz and what they basically showed us in this series against the Golden State Warriors. Now, look, they got swept, but I think everybody had the sentiment that this team was basically just overmatched. This essentially was a bad matchup for the Utah Jazz in the second round. I think that the Utah Jazz probably could have made it a little bit more competitive, so to speak, if this was a first round matchup. If you're the Golden State Warriors, clearly, you take the competition that's presented to you. But after they quickly dispatched the Portland Trailblazers, the one thing that I kept wondering to myself is, do the Utah Jazz have enough offense to run with the Warriors when they start making these runs? Or are they going to lean very heavily on playing better defense than the Warriors, which, to some degree, the Utah Jazz can be capable of doing it. But when you don't have a 100% Rudy Gobert, the mismatches just all across the board, and just the absolute play of Draymond Green really just diminished the sentiment of what the Jazz did to put this team together just to get themselves in the playoffs. That team is just a monster. But I am encouraged by what I did see from the Utah Jazz, despite being swept, that this could be a basketball team that is going to be formidable as long as they continue to add good, solid pieces around the young core that they have. But it does come down to, what will Gordon Hayward do at the end of the season?
No, it absolutely does. And I mean, that is a huge, huge if. We don't know what's happening there. I mean, he needs to opt out. 27 years old, $16.7 million owed on his deal next year. Opt out of that so you can get, 20 plus million, for the next 5 or 6 years. I mean, it's a no-brainer. That's just what he has to do. But again, if he leaves, that really sets the franchise back dramatically, and you don't know that they're going to be a popular free agent destination this summer outside of, just trying to pick up veteran guys like they did this offseason. And again, those pieces work. So you'd hate to see them break up after finally getting in there, because we've been talking about the Utah Jazz team being a potential playoff team for 3 seasons. They finally got there. And like we said in the beginning, of the semifinals, like they aren't just happy to be here, but that's what they're going to have to take. And that's what Golden State gave them. Gave them that 4-0 sweep work. Utah is out of there, and now they have all kinds of questions. Like all these playoff teams that got ousted now have to figure out. George Hill, free agent, 30 years old. What are you going to do with him? Do you try to bring him back? Do you try to go another direction? Even Derek Favors, last year of his deal, $12 million. He's only 25, but he feels like he's 45 because he's always hurt.
And his play at times feels like it's 45, because I really do think that he's lost in the system with Quinn Snyder. I applaud Shaw. I applaud Derek Favors for what he was able to manufacture, given what's happened to him over the last few seasons. Remember, he struggled when he came out of Washington, right? So, so one of the things that really has stood out to me about Derek Favors is, and especially when he came also out of Brooklyn. One of the things that really has stood out to me about Derek Favors and the way that his game, it's that it's taken a long time for it to evolve. He's always been the type of guy that can get you double doubles, but it seems like unless he's in the right kind of system, he seems to get lost in the fray. And to your point now, what do? You brought over Boris Diaw, so that pushed Trey Lyles' maturation process back. I mean, we didn't even see him participating in the playoffs, which, I think is somewhat of a detriment, because I think if you're trying to give a different look to this Warriors team, you got to go younger and you got to go athletic. When the Warriors switched out Pachulia and used McGee, he basically obliterated the half-court defensive style that the Utah Jazz kept trying to throw out, which helped push the pace one more time. And what we said was going to be the killer for the Utah Jazz was transition defense, because the Warriors lead the NBA in fast break points. And once the Warriors start running, the Jazz would not have the propensity to slow them down, especially with a hobbled Rudy Gobert. So not seeing Trey Lyles, at least in this playoffs, makes me wonder, what do you now start doing? Because you got young guys, you need to start playing them, or else they're just going to be commodities that have no value if you're looking to trade them.
Yeah, the thing with Lyles is he had a great summer league and offseason, looked like a guy who they tried to really put him into this rotation. Favors missed the beginning part of the year, so Lyles was getting plenty of minutes then as well too, and just didn't really do much with them when the regular season came around. And he just kind of fell out of the rotation. And that's a shame, because he's a guy who seems to have some promise. And you're right, we'll have to see if he is part of their future and their rotation moving forward, or is he a piece that they think they can move to try to go in another direction. I can't see them giving up on him so fast. But, I mean, you think about this. Rodney Hood, another guy, he had a very injury-prone season this year. Was supposed to be their starting 2 guy, ended up coming off the bench behind Joe Ingles. But you mentioned Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles is a free agent next year. Alec Burks, another guy who's been perpetually hurt over the last 3 years.
I mean, yeah, the Jazz need to do something about Burks. I think the guy has promise. He reminds me a little bit like Alan Crabb in the sense that remember when Alan Crabb got drafted, there were high expectations with the Portland Trailblazers to have that kind of backcourt. And I think because of the injury to Alan Crabb, it forced them to have to make a play to get CJ McCollum. And so now that they see the potential of CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, Alan Crabb, he knew that the clock was ticking on his ability to continue to play at a level where he would be considered in any kind of rotation. So he had to get healthy very quickly. I think the same situation is happening with Alec Burks because nobody's questioning the talent that Alec Burks has, but it does no good when it just sits on the sidelines and it doesn't show anything for anyone as far as what he can display on the court because he can't stay healthy.
Well, we were talking about 2 guys, in the case of Alec Burks and Derek Favors. Again, they're both 25 years old, but they both have injury issues that are just beyond.
I mean, Joe Johnson looks younger than these dudes right now.
Joe Johnson's in excellent shape for a 35-year-old man. I mean, Joe Jesus for real. He really has stayed fit for the majority of his NBA career. But he's not somebody that you can be relying on, for the majority of a regular season. And what he did in the playoffs, especially in the first round, obviously, more so, was what they brought him here to do. Bide your time throughout the regular season, and then you can play some plus minutes in the playoffs and show your veteran presence. But the Utah Jazz team has a lot going on for them if they can keep it together. But I just don't know that with all the personalities, George Hill, Shelvin Mack, Joe Ingles, even Jeff Withey is a free agent, and obviously Gordon Hayward. There's just so many things that seem to be in.
But given the fact that they did make the playoffs, Shaw, do you think that this team needs to trend younger, or do they figure out how to hold the status quo?
I think it's about health, and obviously the key piece is if Hayward dips out, then that changes the entire direction of your organization, and then you may need to liquidate assets. And I guess you're building around Gobert to some degree. You're going to probably try to move Favors, play Lyle some, whatever. Maybe you tank for a draft pick, X, Y, and Z, and you try to get better that way. Maybe you send Boris Dio on his way too. If Hayward opts out and leaves, then I just don't see how you're going to get better or make this team very good for the foreseeable future. Now, again, they had some success early part of this year with Hayward out, but he came back faster than he was supposed to. And then they really kind of took off from there. But again, unless you think Rodney Hood, and I know our guy Tony Smith thinks that Rodney Hood can be a 1A type of player. He took a serious step back this year. So I think that's a little bit in doubt, even in the minds of the Utah Jazz.
All right. Well, we're definitely going to keep our eyes on this. And, I know that this is probably going to be a question we're going to have to ask at a later date, Shaw. But to your point, if Gordon Hayward does opt out and Gordon Hayward does choose to go elsewhere to play for another basketball team, will the Utah Jazz fans ostracize Gordon Hayward in the same way that Oklahoma City fans ostracize Kevin Durant? I'm not talking about the magnitude and the visceralness of what, but I'm talking about is in Utah Jazz fans' minds, should they feel justified in ostracizing Gordon Hayward if he chooses to go elsewhere?
Well, I mean, they will. I don't know if they're justified in doing so. I mean, he's a free agent; he can opt out. So,
he essentially helped this basketball team get to the playoffs, something that they haven't done since 2010.
So, I mean, it's just not the same magnitude of player. But I mean, they were cheering his name as they lost and walked off the court against the Golden State Warriors, and they recognize his importance to the franchise, and they recognize if he leaves that they're going to take a significant step back. So there'll be some people who are very upset. But remember, he tried to leave, after his rookie scale deal, he tried to go to Charlotte, and then Charlotte gave him a max contract, and Utah ended up matching it to keep him. So again, it wouldn't be the first time he's tried to leave this organization. And if he did it over the summer, I don't know that you can necessarily blame him. But a lot of people said after winning that first series that, okay, well, that should be enough to keep him. Getting swept by the Golden State Warriors may not be enough when you think about it in hindsight.
All right. Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes peeled on it. And look, to the Utah Jazz and the Utah Jazz fans and faithful, heck of a run. 20 games over 500. You make it into the first round, doing the impossible, despite, yes, the injury to Blake Griffin, but equally fair, Rudy Gobert was injured and wasn't 100%. You still took it to 7 games against the Los Angeles Clippers, who were still considered heavily favored with Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, perennial all-stars. You found a way past that first round, and then you found yourself playing in the second round against a juggernaut team, that being the Golden State Warriors. And listen, there's no wins for losing, but there's definitely wins for effort and wins for assertiveness and establishing your identity. They played the game exactly to how they are as the Utah Jazz. And unfortunately, this is like, the Toronto Raptors. It's that time for them. Hitch up the wagons. You know what I mean? And it's time for them to just go on and get. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Look, a lot of crazy things happening, a lot of injuries. It's just been a wild, emotional ride so far this NBA playoffs. So let's just go ahead and count them out. Tony Parker's ruptured knee. Shaw has now been diagnosed. He's going to be gone for 8 months. So that basically takes him all the way into next season. Look, what does this mean for the future of Tony Parker, for his career? Forget about playoffs and really a good portion of the beginning of the 2017-18 campaign.
Yeah, it's a shame to see him go out the way he was. He was playing pretty well for them, was the Spurs' second best player offensively. And you just don't know what that means for how he comes back. I think it was a ruptured quadricep is, I think, the official diagnosis. And you come back from something like that. I mean, he's already been a step slow. So now you get another injury to his leg. How much slower is he going to be when he comes back? Patty Mills is there, and Dejounte Murray, we talked about earlier on the show as well too. We don't know what Pop is going to think about this, and R.C. Buford and what moves they may make to replace Tony Parker or to give him some help throughout the regular season. But it is definitely sad news. I know Ginobili was really upset because it looks like he's played his last game alongside his longtime friend TP.
All right, out in Golden State, Steve Kerr. There was speculation that he wasn't going to continue to coach in at least the second round of the playoffs. He may return back for the finals. It's still up in the air, but that spinal leak procedure, clearly he is still suffering symptoms from this. And, obviously it's a big blow. They still have things well in hand with Mike Brown moving from assistant head coach to an interim head coach for the time being. But still, if you're the Warriors, you do have to be concerned about Steve Kerr's overall health.
Absolutely have to be concerned, and you just don't want to see anything bad and put himself in a situation where he's really putting himself at risk. And he's a smart guy. He's not going to do it. Life over basketball every single time, and I think he's going to make the smartest move possible. Golden State is once again acquitting themselves very well without their lead guy. They did it with Luke Walton last year, doing it with Mike Brown this year, and it's playoff times right now. So just speedy recovery for Steve Kerr. Hopefully he's back on the sideline soon, but if not, obviously take care of your health first.
All right, now there's word out in Sacramento that Rudy Gay is planning to opt out of his final year of his contract. I think everybody expected something like that. The problem is damn, we almost forgot about Rudy Gay because he's been gone, virtually non-existent for this better part of the season due to his Achilles injury. Shaw, what does that really say though about Rudy Gay? And is he considered still a viable option for any basketball team that's looking to plug and play a quality 3 guy to help facilitate what teams might be lacking playoff-wise?
I got 2 words for you. Miami Heat. With him opting out and knowing that he's probably not going to be ready for the beginning part of the season and, maybe till All-Star break or something of that nature. The fact that he still opted out of that money just shows you how much he loves Sacramento. So he's gone and he's going to probably take a 1-year prove-it deal somewhere. And I think the Miami Heat are going to be a team that might offer him that. And especially if they can kind of stay afloat.
Toronto Raptors?
I don't think they're going to bring him back. I mean, they've been there, done that. They got rid of him and played better without him. So I think that's the situation he wouldn't go back to. You could think, them, Memphis, all those are teams he's been on. And he's a different player now than he was when he was on those rosters. But I just think anybody's going to be trying to do those retreads. And it also is going to depend what kind of asking price he's looking for if he does take a 1-year proof.
I'm all about recycled assassins, brother. I'm all about those recycled assassins.
See that.
Holla back, Exhibit. Holla back. Finally, Mike D'Antoni, Eric Spoelstra, they split in the NBCA Awards, the National Basketball Association Coaching Awards. which is a very prestigious award and well-deserved, given the job that Eric Spoelstra has done for this Miami Heat team, given the circumstances he endured, and Mike D'Antoni with a fantabulous job getting this Houston Rockets team to a 3rd seed in the Western Conference, and right now are giving the San Antonio Spurs a run for their money. You got to be awfully encouraged that the NBA is in good hands now that D'Antoni is back in the fold and Eric Spoelstra continuing to prove the haters and the doubters wrong.
I mean, it's great that these two guys both get recognized, and I think it's giving some people some hope that maybe we will have co-MVPs and things of that nature if they're willing to split an award that could win anyway. Well, I don't think so, but I mean, it's conversation that's out there, and again, it's hard with both of these guys. But D'Antoni, I think the narrative just got a little bit played out over the course of the year. Houston's success, kind of like, all right, well, now they're good. Now you're kind of gotten over it. And then you look at the Heat and what they were able to do, obviously, from January and on. But they didn't make the playoffs. So, they fell a little bit short of what they were trying to do. But these are two great coaches and two, legendary coaches, or you can really say that, even with Spoelstra at this point of his career. And they're both deserving.
Definitely. So, good things all around. And once again, man, big shout outs to Mike D'Antoni and Eric Spoelstra continuing to push the gamut, to push the trend. We need more coaches to step it up, man. We need more Popoviches. You know what I'm saying? In the fold, man. We need more Popoviches and Rivers in the fold. Eric Spoelstra has definitely been building his resume towards that. It would really be great to see him back pushing the Miami Heat towards playoff contention like they did just this past season. Awesome.
I agree.
Awesome show this week, Shaw. What more can be said, man? Great guest on with our man, Chris Axman. Great conversation and dialogue. We certainly would love to get people's perspective on the things that we brought up in this week's show, the Baseline NBA podcast. And more importantly, what people's thoughts are with reference to this NBA Finals run. I mean, we've been spot on with some of our predictions, and clearly some of these teams have said, yeah, we can't live up to your expectations. So, you know what I'm saying? They hitched the wagon really early for us, man, which is a little disappointing. But listen, I think everybody's been talking about this, man. This might be the real deal, Triple G Canelo style that's headed, on a collision course with the Cavaliers and the Warriors, taking care of their business and taking care of it early.
You're right, man. And again, it's a shame, I think, for most of the people watching the league that the playoffs haven't been that exciting, and you're heading to the collision course that was expected, but there is no drama in the middle. Like, this is 100% just Cavs, Warriors. There's nothing, nobody on the team is really going to get in the way of that. And we just have to wait till I think it's June 2nd when the finals start. So let's get it popping, man. Let's just hurry up and get to it.
Definitely. So once again, we'd like to thank our man, Chris Axman. Definitely. So once again, we'd like to thank our man, Chris Axman from the Almighty Ballers Network. Be sure to check out the show, Almight Ballin NBA Show, and definitely check out his Twitter handle. Check out the Almighty Ballers Network, man. They've got great podcasts, great people on discussing the NBA. I know my man Shaw has been on there a few times, and I myself. We got our peoples from the Drive and Dish podcast also rolling hard with those dudes as well, too. So be sure to check those out and whenever you need to get your fill. Once again, check out the 16 Wins a Ring website. The Baseline NBA podcast is on there. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.